quick housekeeping things again. Stairwells in case of an emergency through the back door over there or past the elevators to the right. Conference rooms A and B through this door are for BC Hydro's use. Breakout rooms A and B and conference room C are for interveners, and there's signs on the door to remind people of that. Washrooms and a water filling station are just through the doors as well, and coffee and tea at the back. So I'll go grab the panel and we'll get started in just a minute. Thanks.
Morning, everyone. Morning, Hydro Panel. Morning, all participants. So I think we're about ready to begin the day. I'll hand it over to Mr. Bear for any detailed information we need.
Thanks, Mr. Chair. Just a quick reminder to everybody in the room and online. The mics, if you could just sit a little closer to it if possible when you're speaking. I think that'll help the transcribers to get a better read on everything. And likewise, just another reminder to please turn the microphones off when you're done speaking. That would really help us out too. And with that, I think subject to any further comments from the chair, we're probably ready to start with BC Hydro's presentation again.
Good morning. As I start, I'd like to briefly go back to yesterday and talk about the near-term action that we had related to the continuation of the Island Generation and McMahon facility. As we presented that new near-term action to the Commission, what we would have liked to do is to have presented a set of alternate portfolios, just similar to what we did for the energy, where we said, like, here's different DSM options, here's different levels of energy acquisitions. We would have liked to do the same thing for capacity, where we have his different approaches to meet that need. And here are how those portfolios rank among our different planning objectives. And we would have liked to present our rationalization for the selection of that to the Commission for their review. But the reality is we really have no other alternatives. So we do have to go with these generation facilities. And it's not like we've been idle with regard to capacity. We just brought the John Horgan facility online last year, adding 1,145 megawatts. We've achieved hundreds of megawatts of savings through our conservation measures. And yet we find that we need more capacity. The limited nature of clean capacity options is something that we've highlighted in our IRP filing, and again, which we will highlight today. This is something that we are working very hard to change. And we are taking action on multiple fronts to unearth options and develop ways of acquiring them. And that's what I would like to focus on next. So yesterday, Ms. Jupp presented the GHG target load scenario, and that sets an appropriate context for the discussion for the longer-term need for capacity. So this shows the need for capacity under that scenario after assuming that all of the planned actions in the 2025 IRP are implemented. So this includes the building of Revelstoke 6, the building of the GMS units 1 to 5, additional batteries and everything. And as you can see, even after all of those actions, by around 2040, you need around 2,500 or 2,000 megawatts of additional capacity, and that number goes up to close to 4,500 megawatts by 2050. And to put those numbers into context, the total capability of our existing heritage hydro assets is around 13,000 megawatts. So the need is a very large one. And given the extent of this need, we are taking action on many fronts to make sure that we will have the capacity resources if such a need unfolds. We're looking at both demand side actions as well as supply side options. Now, yesterday, Mr. Heap asked about vehicle to grid technology, which is a source of demand side capacity. And I'm happy to say BC Hydro is the first Canadian utility to launch a real world field test of vehicle to grid technology using electric school bus. We are funding a pilot project with the Lynch bus lines in Burnaby on 2 school buses, and seeing how they could inject electricity into the grid when we really need it. And school buses, they've got a really predictable charging pattern or schedule, so it's really good in terms of us figuring out, okay, this is the time that we will need to inject power to them, and this is the time when they can actually provide power back to the grid. We are also looking at EV telematics systems. So these are designed to gather and transmit data from electric vehicles to a centralized platform. And by adding EV telematics to our Peak Saver program, we will be able to automatically shift charging of participants' vehicle to grid off peak. We also had a question yesterday from Mr. Manhas regarding the last DSM potential study that we had completed. We last updated our DSM potential study focused on capacity in 2024 and to inform the 2025 IRP, and it looked at demand response programs. We are also currently completing the DSM potentials, our next DSM potential study, and that will be completed at the end of this fiscal year. And it will look at things like rates as well as industrial load curtailment. Moving on to the supply side of things, very briefly, here are some of the capacity options that are characterized in our resource options database. I just want to highlight the rather long lead times, the relatively high cost, and also note that things like geothermal and pump storage have never been developed in British Columbia. There was also a workshop question from the Commission around flexible capacity that other utilities are pursuing. That does indeed provide a great lead-in for the actions that we are taking related to exploring a range of capacity options. So just looking at other utilities, Manitoba Hydro is pursuing fossil gas turbines. They are also looking at enhancements at their existing hydro facilities. Sask Power identifies compressed air storage as a future emerging option. Pacifico is looking at a scheme where they have molten salt as a thermal storage mechanism. So you can extract the heat to drive steam turbines when you need the peak capacity. Hydro-Quebec is increasing the capacity of their existing generation stations and looking to build new hydropower, including pump storage. They are actively pursuing the Gull Island Large Hydro Project, which is around 2,250 megawatts of capacity and 12,000 gigawatt hours. So to put that into context, that's pretty much the same, like double the capacity and energy of the John Howden facility. So really big project. Tennessee Valley Authority and Duke Energy, they are pursuing what's kind of typical of most utilities. They're pursuing fossil gas turbines and batteries. So again, a wide variety of capacity options with mostly, not mostly, but fair bit of fossil gas turbines and a range of clean capacity options. Coming back to BC Hydro, so the 2025 IRP included an action on the completion of a capacity request for expression of interest. That concluded very successfully in December of last year. and I would like to go through some of the results. We received 106 proposals for 19 gigawatt hours of capacity. There were a large number of battery projects, other resource types such as pump storage, geothermal, and fossil gas was also well represented. Looking at the megawatts of those, so again, quite a bit of battery energy storage, as well as a fair bit of pump storage. On the lead times, our understanding is that the submissions with very short lead times may not reflect the complete development cycle of executing an electricity purchase agreement for capacity. It might not include securing long lead time equipment, First Nations engagement, and the development of and structuring of partnerships, permitting, interconnections, and construction. Part of what we have in part of our discussions with the developers is to better understand what these lead times really entail. So we got these submissions, and now we are moving forward. We are now carrying out target discussions with respondents who submitted proposal into the RFEI. We're talking with about half a dozen of the respondents who submitted projects on large hydro, geothermal, and biomass. As part of these discussions, we are looking to better understand the projects themselves and evaluate their acquisition and development timelines. We are also looking beyond the RFEI, and we are talking to other developers about other capacity options that might be available, and to surface and inform our long-term planning with more options that might be out there, which necessarily might not have bid into the RFEI. So unlike energy, where we've now done 2 calls, we know how to structure an acquisition process. We know the structure of the agreements, and we are able to execute those acquisition processes quite quickly. But with capacity, we really don't have that much experience, or any for that matter, in doing a broad call for capacity. And that's something that we are now working on. So we are assessing what procurement pathways look for capacity, and further information on this work will be available later this year, and we will be engaging broadly as we continue this work. Now, as you might have noticed, there is a fair bit of battery megawatts and pump storage megawatts in the submissions. And I'd like to talk about the important role that these resources play, and also the nuances around the large volumes of capacity. Batteries and pump storage are what we call peak shaving resources. So what they do is, while they don't produce electricity on their own, they move electricity usage over time. So take a battery as an example. What they would do is they would discharge during the peak times and charge during off-peak times. So the graphic on the left-hand side, that shows our daily load profile during a winter day. It starts at hour 0 and then goes on to the 24 hours, and the y-axis is the megawatts, the system load. So as you can imagine, early in the morning, our load's low. In the morning, there's a peak as people wake up, and then a little dip midday, and again, as everybody comes home, there is the evening peak, which typically tends to be our system peak. So batteries will and can discharge during the morning peak and the evening peak, and then charge in between as well as overnight. And as you add more and more of these resources to the system, what that does is it moves the off-peak hour loads up and the on-peak hours down, which results in a flat load shape. And as we bring more and more resources of this type into the system, the effectiveness of the additional megawatts that you add, it comes down. So there's the marginal gain that you get is becomes smaller and smaller. So if you ever wondered in our near-term actions why we have a near-term action for acquiring 400 megawatts of additional batteries, and then if you look at our load resource balances, we show only 150 megawatts effective capacity, that is the reason. So after that 400, we would probably need, the next 400 might get only like 100 to 50 megawatts. It's certainly diminishing returns. And this particular phenomenon is true for other resources on the demand side as well. So things like demand response, time of use rates, vehicle degrade, they also have this same impact on the system. Even load curtailment, industrial load curtailment, which might not necessarily have a recovery of the energy that they save, even those, they would need to be available for longer and longer periods, a number of hours for them to be effective. So at some point, as we kind of saturate our system with these resources, we have to bring in generation which are capable of generating for a larger number of hours. And these, like our hydro systems, a really good example of these types of resources where they can generate for hours, days, or even weeks continuously. And that's the type of resources I'm going to turn to next. Looking at our existing assets, it's one of the first things that we do. There's the possibility of getting additional capacity with little additional footprint impact. We are pursuing several opportunities. So we are building Revelstoke 6. We plan on pursuing GMS units 1 to 5. We are doing an upgrade at Bridge River. And we also identified in the May 28th letter the additional capacity that we would get from Mica units 1 and 2 and 7 Mile units 1 and 3. There's also additional opportunities at small facilities around the province. There could be upgrades at Falls River close to Prince Rupert, where right now we spill 50% of the inflows that come into Falls River. So there's certainly potential to capture more of that inflows for both energy as well as capacity, and other opportunities as well, such as Alouette and Volage. So typically what we've done is we've looked at, okay, as our turbines and generators age and we've got to replace them, we've looked at opportunities for, can we put in a little turbine that's a little bit more efficient? Can we put a circuit breaker that has a higher rating? Those are the types of incremental gains that we've done and looked at in the past. Given the need for capacity and the fact that it's a large need, we are actually going even further. We are now exploring the possibility of adding new powerhouses to existing reservoirs. So not just the powerhouses that exist right now. We are looking at doing a new water conveyance system, say on the another side of the dam, of the reservoir, and adding a new powerhouse where you will be getting the extra capacity, but not necessarily more energy, because it's still the same amount of water behind the dam. So as part of that process, we will review and screen the storage capability of all our existing reservoirs to determine whether they can provide the additional dependable capacity. This includes looking at the winter storage of our facilities, looking at the hydrology, like what sort of inflows do you get in the winter. Some reservoirs get very little, whereas the facilities in the south coast, where you do get a fair bit of rain in the winter, you do get decent inflows in the winter as well. And we're looking at the opportunities that might exist. It is quite early in the process, but we are looking at all of our fleet and seeing, including the dams where we don't have any generation right now, to see what we can add. subject to legislation that enables us to carry out technical and environmental investigations. We will also be looking at the large hydro potential of 2 sites mentioned in the Powering Growth strategy. Those are the Site E on the Peace River and the Hamatko River. Now, Site E theoretically could be the 4th dam and powerhouse on the Peace, and it could make use of the vast storage capability of the Williston Reservoir. So the Williston Reservoir, it can store like years of water, and the discharge from that can be modulated so that the GMS facility, the Peace Canyon facility, John Hogan, and theoretically the Site E facility could make use of that storage capability and really generate when we need it. So like during the winter, or it could even store over seasons and generate when we really need it for the system. Early estimates suggest Site E could be around 750 megawatts and produce around 3,000 gigawatt hours of energy each year. Another option that was identified in the Powering Growth strategy is the Hamatko River. It has the advantage that it's close to our South Coast Load Center. So it sits around 250 kilometers away from Vancouver. And this project could be up to 4 dams and 3 powerhouses and could produce around 500 to 900 megawatts of capacity and 3,000 to 4,500 gigawatt hours of energy. And again, I do want to reiterate, this is us looking broadly at all options. Given the potential need for electrification to support climate action, we feel it is good to look at all options at this stage. And again, any investigation of these would be subject to legislation that allows us to do the technical and environmental investigations. Next, so capacity obviously has been a big part of my presentation and a theme of our certainly our discussion. And in addition to looking at capacity resources, we are also looking at the topic of capacity resource adequacy. This is something that is common. The interest in capacity resource adequacy is a common theme all across North America as utilities move away from resources such as gas and coal towards wind, solar, and batteries. As part of this process, we will be looking at a couple of modeling options that will allow us to look at a broad range of resource adequacy metrics. We will be able to compare various resource portfolios, look at how these new metrics are for each of these portfolios. So kind of give a broader flavor of how different portfolios stack up against each other. And we will be engaging with interested parties as we go through this process. The timelines and the timelines are shown in the study. And we plan on incorporating the findings of this into our next IRP in 2028. And with that, I will hand it back to Ajay for his closing remarks.
Thank you, Sanjaya. I think we talked a lot about the opportunities that we see in BC Hydro. There was actually another document that was published last month. It was called the Powering Canada Strong by Natural Resources Canada. And that looked at all the different utilities in the Canadian landscape and predicted that by the end of 2050, the electric infrastructure will double. And I think that is the opportunity that's facing not just us, but other utilities in the same realm. And I think what we have tried to do today and yesterday is give a flavor for how we are approaching this uncertainty that we have talked about. And I think I've said that again before, our role is not to predict the future. but it's to be ready for what the future is going to be. And I think what we have done in the last day and a half is try to give you some confidence that we do understand how the load is going to materialize and the different scenarios we are looking at. And then Sanjaya talked about all the different options that we have in terms of the energy and the capacity, which sets us up quite nicely in my mind for what the future would be as we go down this path. With that, I'm going to open it up for any questions.
Thank you very much. Mr. Bear, please go ahead with our groups to ask questions.
First is Mr. Ince online for the Commercial Energy Consumers Association.
Yes, thank you. Good morning. So I've got a question on pumped and battery storage. Just a quick question on, these are net energy consumers. Is that correct? I've heard that it requires energy on a net basis to pump up or pump down or to charge and discharge the batteries. And I've heard numbers as high as 30%. Can somebody clarify as to what is the net energy consumption of these storage solutions?
Yes, you're correct, Mr. Ince. They are net consumers of energy. So take pump storage as an example. So you discharge the water from an upper reservoir to a lower reservoir, but the energy that it takes to pump the water back is a little bit more than what you got out of generating. For pump storage, yeah, the efficiency losses can be as high as 30%. Depending on like how close the reservoirs are, it can certainly be lower. Batteries, typically, the efficiency loss is around 10%.
Well, thank you. And yesterday, I see the transcript, page 97. Mr. Kumar gave an excellent discussion on the value of diversification of a portfolio and mentioned wind and solar as targets for future procurements. So I've got a question about a high-level question about the operability of the BC Hydro system. And BC Hydro is obviously a winter peaking utility, peak demands in January and December, whereas its energy in terms of inflows come in at the exact opposite time of the year during the freshet, so peaking in May, June. So it's a disconnect between the demand and the supply, and that's only made operable by the significant storage assets of the BC Hydro system. So I guess my question is to Mr. Kumar is wind and solar improving the operability of the system? And as you know, there's a pinch point within the seasons, such as in June. Sometimes BC Hydro has so much inflows and so much energy potential and so little demand that it's forced into a situation of either exporting at a very low price or even worse, having to spill with the environmental consequences. So, Mr. Kumar, primarily, how do you see the operability of the BC Hydro system going forward, and particularly with the emphasis on wind and solar?
Yeah. Thank you, Mr. Ince. My comment yesterday was more around the diversification of our portfolio because there's a lot of discussion that has happened over the last 5-6 years about the dry seasons we are having and the impact on our reservoirs. So I think the point I was trying to make in yesterday's discussion was, as we go down this path of looking at where the energy and the capacity would come from, we have to look at that diversification. And the point was that with wind and solar, which is upwards of 25% of our energy composition and will increase as we go forward with our new calls, gives us that healthy diversification and not lean upon the hydro resources as we face the uncertainty of the water conditions sometimes, which has improved quite considerably this year, I may say. I think the other point I want to make and I'm going to hand it over to Sanjaya to get into some more specifics about what you were referring to, but the one thing that we have to keep in mind from an operability standpoint is, if you look at what happened in Spain and Portugal last year with their Iberian blackout and the level of operational, the renewables that were on the system versus the large hydro or the gas generation that provides that inertia. So I think one of the things from an operability standpoint that we are looking at is, what is that comfortable level of those renewables that can be managed at the same time so that our system reliability and resilience stays intact, because that is an important aspect of what we do. We haven't reached that tipping point, but I think there's lessons learned from other jurisdictions in terms of how they have operated and some of the planning decisions that they have made in real time that has led to the point where the system has been compromised and then has led to widespread blackout. So I think that's the kind of thinking that is starting to take traction as we go down this path of operability. How do we manage that risk?
Thank you.
Yeah, and if I could add a couple of things, so maybe first talking about the resources themselves. So as Mr. Kumar said, wind and solar, they are obviously not tied to hydro inflows, so they provide that energy diversity. In terms of providing a capacity contribution, what we found out was that wind resources, as they are more geographically diversified across the province, there's better capacity contribution from that portfolio of wind resources towards meeting our peak needs. And of course, solar, while it provides the energy diversification, doesn't provide capacity. And certainly managing these resources, so wind obviously varies within minute to minute as the wind gusts come and go. And solar, even though you might think, well, it should be fairly stable throughout the day, it does have its own challenges. Sometimes you can have really good solar output and a cloud cover passes by and your solar output drops quite like almost close to zero. So even though it doesn't change, it doesn't vary too much, when it does vary, the variation can be quite extreme. So managing these really requires flexibility from the rest of the system. And that's where our hydro system has done a really good job thus far of managing these resources. But of course, even a really good system has its limits. And we are finding that we need to add flexible capacity, which can help manage these resources. Things like batteries can help a little bit. But again, sometimes you need facilities with much larger storage. So this really comes back to us looking at optimizing our assets, right? We can make use of the capability that we have and add more capability, the storage capability that we have, and add more capacity. And also coming back to the potential around large hydro, again, this is a reason that jurisdictions such as Quebec are looking at large hydro. In addition to the energy and capacity, the ability to provide that energy and capacity flexibly is a big plus for those resources.
Excellent. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Ince. Next.
Next is Mr. Lusney for the Clean Energy Association of BC.
Thank you again, and great job on all the presentation. Can we go to slide 73? So I think one thing, and I'll preface this before getting into questions, like capacity is an incredibly important aspect to the system. It's also very much a second order requirement that your mix of hourly demand expectations and your profile of the resources you have plus the flexibility they have define kind of your capacity needs. So it can kind of iterate through. So see here listing on an estimated capacity cost, typically in this the dollar per kilowatt year. One is, does BC Hydro have any intent to publish kind of the full request for expression of interest for the capacity resources? So we're getting kind of ranges here. Will we be able to see more information, or is BC Hydro expecting that to be commercially sensitive?
I think as Sanjaya was mentioning, this was a request for expression of interest, which is very different than an RFP. So the information that was provided, and Sanjaya alluded to the fact that some of those timelines are very optimistic because it doesn't take into account a lot of the things that when it becomes a project, that is the reality that we face. So I think at this point, it's a very preliminary information. And I don't think I would actually put a lot of credence on some of the numbers at this point. That's one of the reasons why we are actually pursuing some of those discussions with the proponents to get a better understanding. Over the next few months, we will have a better understanding of the process we are going to do in terms of the capacity. whether we go down the path of one-off discussions and look at Site E or Hamathco, whether we go down the path of a formal RFP, where we will get submissions that actually you can make some decisions on. So I think the intent of the RFEOI, because it was launched last year, was to get a sense for the interest from the market. And what we got out of this as a key summary was there is a lot of interest and there's a lot of technology. But I've not focused on the fact that this is the cost estimate that was put forward, or these are the timelines. I think there's a lot of discussion required around those before we can get comfortable with that.
Okay, thank you. If we could go to slide 77. So you've had the lists of expression interest, and I agree that, kind of outlining what prices might be given certain timelines, but without formal commercial terms. But for the near-term actions that BC Hydro's laid out, primarily driven from a capacity point of view, there's a whole number of actions. Does BC Hydro have an estimate of a similar capacity value for these actions? And is this something that is published on a kind of per near-term action basis so that you can kind of see the range, or is there a kind of level set number that would be used?
Just to clarify, Mr. Lusney, are you talking about these specific options that you're listed?
Yes.
Yeah, certainly for some of these, we have, and especially, certainly for the ones we have as near-term actions, yes, we do have costs that are published in the resource as part of Chapter 2 resource options section. So Revelstoke 6, GMS units 1 to 5, as well as some of the other options are listed and their costs are provided.
And is the cost a full cost or just a capacity value, and then there's an energy cost as well?
So some of these facilities provide capacity as well as energy. So take Revelstoke 6 as an example. It provides around 488 megawatts of capacity and 26 gigawatt hours of energy. So what we typically do is, especially in our modeling, we say, okay, it provides capacity and it has this energy, which provides an energy value, right? So energy, 26 gigawatt hours at $97 per megawatt hour. And it comes to be as a credit to the capacity cost. That's what we typically do in the analysis.
Okay.
I think the point we are making here is sometimes the driver can be capacity, sometimes energy. In Revelstoke 6 example, it is the capacity dollar and the benefit that is driving it. Energy is an ancillary benefit we get, but it's not a big number as Sanjay talked about. So I think it all depends on which opportunity. Best opportunities are the ones that give you capacity and energy, but sometimes that's not the case.
We'd all love to have those resources all the time. And in the calculation of this, is there any regional benefit that's taken in from the power system, either on the bulk side or the regional, in terms of a value provided? Because each of them are going to be in different parts of the system, have different constraints.
Absolutely. So when we do our modeling as part of IRP development, that's certainly something that we take into account. So Revelstoke 6, even though it's a great capacity resource, it is in the interior. Whereas something like Wallich, it's small, but still that's close to the load center. So those regional benefits would definitely be taken into account.
Okay. So if you look at the map over there, Revelstoke is far away from our load centers, is what Sanjay was talking about. And the 500 kV system that connects that would be impacted by the upgrades over there. Then we analyze that as part of our transmission planning studies. Every time we have a new energy and a capacity resource, the power has to flow out.
Okay. Could we go to the next slide? So understanding that there is, I'll call it political activity that's going on while this IRP, it is difficult to get too deep into certain questions for what could be argued as new evidence, but it is what it is. Am I correct in my very simplistic math that the range of annual capacity factors between Site E and the two different options on the Hamathco River would range from 45% annual capacity to around 68-70%? And I'm literally taking the 750 megawatts and the 3 terawatt hours.
I honestly have to say, Mr. Listening, I haven't done the capacity factor calculation, but yes, certainly if you did 3,000 gigawatt hours divided by 750 times 8.76, yes, you would get the capacity factor for
Okay.
safety.
And then
Same thing for
okay.
Hamadko.
And then would it be fair to say, and back to the it is comment that if a similar resource had a similar capacity factor with a similar operability additions, that would be something that would be of interest to BC Hydro?
I think at this point, we are certainly interested in all capacity resources. So, like I mentioned, this is an early investigation into the potential. So yes, short answer is yes. We would certainly be interested in all capacity resources.
Okay, so then final question, if we go to slide 76.
So, sorry, could
Yes.
I just maybe
Yeah.
provide some context on those two potential capacity projects? We are very early on in our investigation, and what we are looking for from a legislative policy perspective is just having the ability to do some environmental and site assessments. These projects can take 15 to 20 years. So there'll be ample opportunity for us to bring that forward as part of the future IRPs. So it's not a near-term action included in there. What we are trying to signal over here is we do have capacity options in the IRP that are moving forward, and we are very strongly believe those are the right ones, but we need to start preparing for the future. And that's why we are looking at it. And as I said, most of the capacity things that are listed in our powering growth plan that was announced yesterday, we can map it to the last two IRPs. They are either reflected in 21 IRP or the 25. This is the only area that is actually, I would say, that's above and beyond that, but there's opportunities for us to include that as part of our future after we've done some assessment, because at this point, the technical and the financial viability of these projects, we are not sure where it stands. They were analyzed in the 80s before, but life has changed quite a bit since then.
No, I very much get that. And I mean, on continuing conversations between us is on that the IRP serves different purposes for different timelines, and that the first few years is near-term actions. What has to happen to meet your reliability, security needs? And then part of a lot of what we're discussing is, okay, what are the next near-term actions and what adjustments? But then the long-term, beyond 10 years, is we need to start investigating, because unfortunately for electricity, you can't deliver stuff overnight. It can take 10, 15 years.
Yeah. And I also want to go back to Mr. Sanjaya's answer or your question regarding other opportunities. I think we are exploring a number of opportunities, but there are some opportunities we are not going to explore, like new gas generation in BC, and nuclear generation in BC, coal generation. Those are things that are not part of our portfolio. So when we talk about energy and capacity, and we are open to that suggestion, it has to fall within the policy realm of what we are operating in and the things that we have explored or have experience with before.
Okay. That actually brings me to one of my last questions, which is, so we heard yesterday that the full electrification of LNG facilities is not part of kind of your base reference assumptions or even your high load. Does BC Hydro, those facilities are going to have some form of gas-fired generation on their site to use to run their facility. There may be abilities to disconnect the LNG facility and how high you're running those gas behind. Does BC Hydro in the long term view a capacity value to the dispatchability of those large industrial loads if they have behind the meter generation?
Where we know about self-generation, we do include it in our load forecast. We do have, for example, for Howe Street customers, they have historically had self-generation. So our load forecasts reflect BC Hydro's electricity supply. In the case of LNG terminals and some other types of customers, they do value reliable, dependable supply. We haven't heard any intention from them to curtail or switch on an hourly or a daily basis between generation resources. Their request is for reliable, dependable supply, and our load forecasts reflect those requests and our commitment to them. In terms of the comment about the LNG terminals having on-site generation, what we have the most visibility into is the request for service that they have made to BC Hydro. A number of the terminals are fully electric. Woodfibre, as an example, Cedar, And our load forecasts reflect their request for firm, dependable electricity supply, in some cases risk adjusted. So if the project, for example, is yet to start construction, it will be risk adjusted in the load forecast.
Okay, but at this time, there's no kind of view on the ability to gain operability benefits from that customer. So not a demand response, but a kind of operating in a way that helps the BC hydropower system.
We're not expecting them to be dispatchable. No, they're not a generation source for BC Hydro. They are they are load customers that we would be providing dependable service to.
Okay. The last one, just, and this is less of a question, but I'll frame it as a question, is you kind of talk about storage as being peak shaving, but then later we talked about the kind of operability challenges. And so in the assessments that BC Hydro is looking at, do you consider other values that come from long or mid duration energy storage resources or similar type of technologies, such as operability, ramping, regulation capacity, and operating reserve?
I think the operational study that I was referring to was more around the fact that the profile of wind on our system is changing. And with the last the call where we had 9 or 10 projects, 9 were wind. These are all 4 wind in the 25 call. The level of wind penetration on our system is increasing, not to a point where we are overly concerned about it, but it is going up as a proportion. So we are doing an operational study trying to see how our control center can actually operate those resources without compromising the resiliency of that of the system, given the fact that other jurisdictions have had challenges. I think with respect to your operability of other resources like pump storage and batteries, I'll have to defer to Sanjay about.
Yeah, certainly we recognize the fact that things like pump storage and batteries can offer some of those characteristics of frequency, regulation, voltage, and the fact that, yeah, they can serve as a load in some instances can be beneficial.
Okay, and I guess the last one is, and just following up on the comment on the operability study, like I would expect BC Hydro, given its system, the challenges is not just as a normal operating condition with different weather years on your load side, but also different weather years on your hydro system. So low water has very different challenges when mixing with other resources compared to a high water year. And given that BC Hydro's hydroelectric system is more valley based than flooded plains, it has a higher cost of spilled energy. So it has to operate around that, which gives different challenges. So kind of back to one of the earlier questions.
Absolutely. All that would be part of the scope.
Okay. Thank you.
Next is Mr. Green with WeCan.
Good morning, panel and BC Hydro presenters. Really appreciate presentations and discussion over the last day and a bit. And I have 3 areas of questions. And I'm going to go backward from the topic today. And I hope you don't mind me going back to a topic from yesterday and find this topic, which I hope I can keep within workshop scope, and I think it's possible.
I'll just comment there. I'm going to allow that at a preliminary basis. We don't want to revisit the previous day, but I'll allow, depending on how far you try to go, I'll allow some questioning of earlier, if that's all right with the panel. But fairly constrained because we need to move forward in this process. Okay, so please keep that in mind.
Thank you very much. Start by saying really appreciate the development of the GHG emissions reduction scenarios. From our perspective, very, very helpful and indeed necessary. Again, recognizing the huge policy, legal, technical uncertainties associated with that and modeling uncertainties associated with that scenario, but we think it's very helpful. So on today's topic, I think a very brief question pertaining to large hydro. If you could very briefly perhaps summarize the transmission challenges associated and approaches associated with Hamasco, whether you're planning to go to the island or through the Coast Range, which would have huge challenges. And then as a Kootenay participant, particularly interested in whether you see a role for Duncan significantly and less significantly Elko in future resource acquisition.
So maybe I'll take the transmission question. As I mentioned, for Hamatco, that's a, I guess, project that has been planned or studied before in the 1980s. I remember seeing a system diagram that one of my planners sent me from those days. And it had connections going all the way to Vancouver Island from Hamatco. There's one potential, and one was going east towards Kelly Lake. So Kelly Lake would be where it's almost parallel to Hamatco icon, and you just go across and you hit the BC Hydro system on that diagram. That's where Kelly Lake would be. So I think those are two potential ways of connecting Hamatco. Subsequent to that analysis, we actually do have another 500 kV system that was developed at the bottom. So you can actually go to Malaspina, go south also. So there are three ways of connecting Hamatco. Ideally, from a planning perspective, if I just put on my planning hat, having a large hydro facility in that area which has no transmission right now, ideally it should be connected on two sides because it gives you that flexibility of moving the power through the system, and that would be the ideal way of doing it. But at this point, it's too early. We haven't really landed on anything. We are going into the assessment phase. There's benefits of each interconnection. If you go to the Vancouver Island, you solve your long-term problems for supply to Vancouver Island because the cables that are serving currently are about 20 years away from end of life projection. So this would provide you a new route for that. So I think there's lots of opportunities and potentials for Hamatco. Too early for us to say which one is the one we are going to go through. But it is a new 500 kV system that has to be developed to interconnect that. Site E is a little different. It is close to our existing generation, John Horgan, GMS, Peace Canyon. So we do have a 500 kV system that's already developed in the area. And we just need to connect the new generation, if that moves forward, to our existing system. The challenge for us over there is going to be, where is the load that we are going to serve? And what we are finding in BC grid is, historically, our load used to be predominantly in Lower Mainland and Vancouver Island. So 70, 80, 75% of our load was there. So it was a given that in the 60s and the 70s, when we were planning the system, power would come from the Peace region and the Columbia region and all will flow down. That is no longer the case. We are finding that we are starting to get three load centers. One is our traditional load center in Vancouver Island and Lower Mainland. Then there's a Peace region load center with oil and gas and upstream loads that are materializing in that region, and the North Coast, which we talked about yesterday. So depending on if the load is growing a lot in the Peace region, that is very close to where site E is going to be. So the load is going to get, the power is going to get consumed in that area. If that load doesn't materialize and cannot take all the capacity and the energy, then the power has to flow down the bulk system, in which case we may have to upgrade that system. So I think it all depends on the future load, where it is. If the load is close to generation, that makes life easier from a transmission perspective. If load is far away from transmission, then you need to think in terms of where that load is going to be, where the power is consumed, and we have to look at the impact on the bulk system.
Thank you.
Yeah, and I believe the second part of the question was
Duncan and Elko.
Yeah, so Duncan, right now it does not have any generation on it. It's just the dam there. Elko, it was a 12 megawatt facility which is currently out of service, and we are looking at options for what do we do with it. So as I mentioned in the slide, we are looking at all of our assets, including the dams where we don't have generation right now, and so including Duncan, and we will be going through each one of them and seeing what's the potential for adding generation, including new powerhouses, and we will do that with Elko as well. So right now, again, that's at a very preliminary stage, so I don't have any updated information.
Thanks very much. The secondary question goes back to what we spent a lot of time on yesterday, but didn't get to the end point I was hoping for with slide 60. And context, of course, and strong theme of your presentation has been planning with uncertainty and the role that potential surpluses play in addressing uncertainty or planning for surpluses to address uncertainty. But I understand from the discussion yesterday that the rate impact projections, for example, was 6,500 gigawatt hours of 2.9%, which is obviously a significant rate impact, but that you discounted that because that rate impact, I think, essentially disappears if this was based on the 2026 load forecast. So that was helpful to know. But regardless, there will be, if you plan, if one of the ways of addressing uncertainty is planning for a surplus or contemplating a surplus, perhaps, you still will have situations where there could be a rate impact. And of course, the comparison here was between the cost of the LRMC for new energy versus what you can get on the market in referencing the mid-C. And if I understood correctly, you did a comparison with average mid-C prices and low and high mid-C prices, but I didn't get a full understanding of that, whether your analysis took into account the ability of the very sophisticated abilities of PowerX and the storage capacity of the BC Hydro system to reduce that rate impact by selling when when prices are high. And so does this analysis include the trading and energy storage capacities of the BC Hydro system with PowerX?
Well, I definitely will allow it because I was interested in that too.
Okay. Thank you.
So the analysis of the value of the surplus, it was based on the market price forecast that we have in the IRP. It's in Appendix F. It was filed confidentially with the Commission because of the commercial confidentiality of the market price forecast. It outlined 3 forecasts, so those were the values that were used in the analysis. In terms of the PowerX, so BC Hydro transacts with PowerX through the transfer pricing agreement. So there is a certain it has a certain structure which outlines, yes, the revenue that BC Hydro would get from electricity. It recognizes that PowerX would be able to perhaps get better prices than the average mid-C price when they market that energy, and that is reflected in the analysis. But again, the transfer pricing agreement forms the basis for us valuing the energy at mid-C.
Thank you. And I hope this last question doesn't stray out of workshop scope. I'll try and frame it as such. And that is going to DSMs, and that overall DSMs are out of workshop scope, but at a strategic level, it seems to me that if there is any capacity, any ability to address the immediate capacity gap, the kind of fiscal 2030 capacity gap, other than natural gas generation, that it would be through DSMs. And I recognize that BC Hydro has this huge, long expertise with DSMs, going back more than 30 years, something you can be very proud of. But from looking at the, economic metrics associated with DSM performance, so looking at, for some DSM programs, benefit costs, a utility benefit cost test of 2 or higher than 2, average cost a few years ago in the evaluation of EE programs of $39 a megawatt hour. And
So is is your question, wouldn't it be a profitable thing to even ramp up DSM for that shorter term?
Yes,
Is that what you're asking?
it would seem to me there's scope for expanded ambition for DSM in
Great.
the short
Let's
term.
hear what they think.
Yes. And I'd like to understand, if not, why not, and what the limitations are. Thank you.
Certainly, DSM is, as we've said several times, it's the first thing that we turn to. And it's important to recognize the ambition of the DSM that we are trying to do right now, and also what we've achieved. So by fiscal 34, we are trying to get 800 megawatts of savings, right? And by fiscal 30, just through capacity focused DSM and not through the capacity contribution of the energy efficiency, we are getting close to 350 megawatts. These are significant numbers.
Yeah.
So we are doing the best we can and pushing as hard as we can. Even though DSM, like you would think it's short lead times, yes, it is, but it does take time to ramp up. And our Power Smart 2 program is trying to get that ramp up as fast as we can. It is, for marketing purposes, it is described as the most ambitious plan, DSM plan we've had. And I think that is really an accurate characterization. So future potential. So as we outlined yesterday, and I'll go back to that slide, we did again look at DSM as the first opportunity. And certainly in our resource options database, we did have additional options. It was small, demand response program B. It was also quite costly. And then finally, what I would like to say is going back to a slide that I showed today. When you add capacity focused DSM, just like batteries and even things like vehicle to grid. So what you're doing is you're clipping the peaks, and as you try to add more, you need to add lots to get a decent amount of savings. So island generation and MacMan contribute around 400 megawatts. To get that 400 megawatts, you probably need one, and again, this is just a general ballpark figure. You probably need around 1,000 megawatts of demand response to get that same capacity contribution, which gives you a sense of like the amount of extra DSM that we would have to do. And I come back to the numbers I quoted for batteries, where we add 400 megawatts of batteries, but what you see reflected in the load resource balances is 150 megawatts. And that's exactly the type of reduction that you get for these short duration capacity focused DSM.
Thank you very much. Thanks.
Thank you.
Next is Mr. Magnus online with the Clean Energy Association of BC.
Thank you very much, and good morning, everyone. I just have a couple of questions here regarding the battery RFP again, and I'll try to be brief here. Yesterday, we had discussed, and BC Hydro had noted the philosophy and the size of the calls for energy, and we think there's good philosophy there that 2,000 gigawatt hours is roughly a good benchmark for a positive signal to industry to launch a competitive process with competitive prices. My question is if BC Hydro sees a similar philosophy for a benchmark to ensure a competitive process for an RFP for batteries. That is, there would be an amount that would result in a competitive process, whether it be 300 to 500 megawatts compared to a smaller focused RFP. I think you had mentioned on Vancouver Island, if it's at the 50 megawatt mark, that would suffer from being too low and then not sending that positive signal to industry. So the question is whether Hydro is applying the same philosophy, and if there is a recognition that a higher megawatt target would result in more competitive bid prices for batteries in the RFP.
Yeah. As I mentioned yesterday, we are doing this procurement in actually two phases. One is requesting information from the proponents, and then based on that, we will narrow down the proponents and for the RFP, which will be launched in the fall timeframe. So I think that gives us a good way of getting that feedback from the suppliers in terms of if there's economies of scale they want to put forward. So I think we are going to structure the procurement in such a way that we are not as prescriptive. The location is quite prescriptive in the sense that we know where the transmission system can take on this opportunity for installing the batteries on Vancouver Island. But as you have seen in our near-term action in the 2021 call, the IRP, we have 50 megawatts. In the 2025, we talk about up to 400 megawatts if the high scenario becomes reality. So I think that optionality and openness will be there. Batteries typically come in modular sizes. So if you're doing it for 50, you can actually add another 50 and the 50 and so forth. So I think that ability to actually scale is like Lego blocks. You can build on those. And I think that's why we said minimum 50, and then we will see if there's some economies of scale or any feedback from the suppliers that allow us to actually choose another level. So that is to be decided, and we are keeping that option quite open.
Okay, thank you. And yeah, just would quickly respond that we definitely recognize the modular ability and the, as you say, the analogy with Lego blocks is certainly could be applied. But I just highlighting, of course, that in terms of signals to the market, more certainty on size in advance is very important for planning both the technical aspects of the projects, but as we've discussed today, putting the time and effort into working with First Nations to define those opportunities in advance is important in driving those bid prices to be competitive. So the earlier the signal, certainly the better. But appreciate the clarification there, and as well, just noting that yesterday, I think you had stated and this is the second question, you had stated the RFP, I think you mentioned award would be aimed for the end of 2026 after the launch in the fall, and I'd just like to confirm that today.
Yeah, I think that is still early on. We are developing this. The numbers could change or the timelines could change, but we are trying to do the initial discussion with the market in the summer timeframe, and then launch the RFP in fall with the hope that we can actually have the awards at the end of the calendar year. But again, this is the first time we are making a foray into the battery world, and we just have unlike the call for power where we've got some experience, this is something that we are keeping our options open, and the timelines may reflect that reality when we cross that bridge.
Okay, thank you.
Next is Mr. Craig online with the Commercial Energy Consumers Association.
Thank you. I'm following up on some questions that we asked. It was 10.1 in the last CEC RCIA Costco submission and 9.1 before that. It's dealing with the subject of emerging geothermal resources that are in commercial implementation and the potential for monitoring those for future applications. The concern I have is that we look at what's immediately in front of us and what we know about, and are we anticipating sufficiently or just looking at the immediate things? The challenge I see is how do we bring these really exceptional opportunities in as soon as they're commercially proven and ready to be looked at? And would BC Hydro be interested in further engagement from us with regard to this and how it might be considered for long-term planning options?
I'll just add to that sort of for clarity, or ask you, Mr. McCraig, are you thinking of the traditional idea of hotspot geothermal, or the new developments we're watching, which basically use Earth's heat gradient for geothermal, so that it can be almost anywhere? Which were you referring to in this question, or both?
I'm referring to the Quaze technology, which is the last one that you mentioned, which
Okay.
is dealing with the temperature gradient,
Yeah. Okay.
which
Thanks.
happens to be extremely advantageous at our coastal situation,
Okay. Thanks.
but can be implemented anywhere. So it's emerging and it's extremely attractive, and I'd like to see how we get that into planning, and I'd like to work with BC Hydro to do that. Over to BC Hydro for a response.
Yeah, so as part of our resource options database, we do monitor emerging technologies such as enhanced geothermal. So in this one, if I understand Mr. Craig correctly, this is where you drill very deep into the ground, you inject water, then you have another well, another outlet where you take the water and you recycle the water. So this enhanced geothermal, it requires quite a bit of drilling. So typical geothermal, it could be like 2 or 3 kilometers, but enhanced geothermal can be 8 to 10 kilometers into the ground. So we are looking at a very, very deep hole into the ground. And the other issue with that is that, well, you obviously are not relying on the water in the ground, but you need pump water, and that can be large volumes of water. You need to make sure that the porosity of the ground is such that you don't lose too much of the water. So definitely, just like any other technology, everything has its challenges, and that's why we are looking at a broad range of options as we've outlined. And it is
So you're referring to ESG, which is a different type than the one that I'm referring to. At any rate, it's important that you are looking at them and maybe considering that. And I think it's just a huge potential issue of real strategic importance that we find out how we can look at this for our long-term planning.
I think maybe I could just add to your question there, Craig, in terms of hydro is always open to technologies. And as we start focusing on capacity, we have a renewed focus on looking at technologies, different options. So if there are things out there that make sense from a system perspective, we are absolutely open to have those conversations with the proponents.
That's fabulous, and I'm available at any time to dig into it. I've looked into it a lot, and I think it's going to be important for the commission to be looking into it as well.
But not
Thank you.
Not at your consulting rate. Is this okay? This is not a marketing workshop.
No.
Is that it, Mr. Craig, or do you have another question?
No, that's my question.
All right. Thank you.
Thank you.
Next is Mr. Heap for the City of Richmond.
Good morning. Thanks for all the information that you've delivered at the workshop thus far. Much appreciated. There was one IR that we sent in that we haven't had a response to in the slide deck. And I do apologize because this is a question that should have been asked at the end of the day yesterday. Okay, so I'm going to read from my the IRs so that I don't mess it up. So slide 67 would be the most appropriate slide for this. But I'm referring to slide Exhibit B8, footnote 18, where BC Hydro states that the consideration of energy objective 2C, as amended by the BC regulation, the clean electricity regulations. So that objective 2C is that by 2030 to ensure that 100% of the electricity generated in British Columbia and supplied to the integrated grid is generated from clean or renewable resources. That objective is not supported by continued operation of island generation at McMahon. But you stated, or BC Hydro stated, that that was outweighed by Clean Energy Act Section 6, the self-sufficiency obligation. So I was wondering if you could identify how BC Hydro considered Objective 2G, that is the greenhouse gas reduction, which is a priority objective under Section 4 of the Energy Objectives Regulation, how you consider that in this balancing exercise that you describe in Exhibit B8, and how that consideration is reflected in the request for a conclusive determination under Section 44.1, subsection 9, for the 400 megawatt capacity addition.
Yeah. So if I could refer you to our response to BCUC 1.4.1. In that response, we talk about the energy objectives under the Clean Energy Act and the self-sufficiency requirements. And I'm just going to read that from the response. BC Hydro does not interpret the individual energy objectives in Section 2 as creating a legal obligation, compliance obligation. From our perspective, if you look at the different objectives, they can be sometimes competing in terms of how they are laid out. So it gives us the ability to balance those across the different objectives. And from our standpoint, if you look at the Clean Energy Act, it defines it as a legal obligation that we have to be self-sufficient under the reference load forecast. And I think that's what we have taken our approach here, is that if you start looking at the 2026 reference load forecast that we presented as part of our submission, to meet those requirements laid out in the reference load forecast, we need energy resources that are in play for us to allow us to have that load resource balance. So I think that response that we've outlined over there talks about the different objectives, the priorities, and given all the different things that we have to deal with. For example, if you look at Objective 7 F2, it also talks about the fact that the authorities' rates do not exceed cumulative inflation. So there are many things that are competing for those objectives, and for us, it's a balancing act. And what we have done in this IRP has provided the right balance in meeting those objectives as well as the legal requirements under the Clean Energy Act.
Okay. Again, I would just note that was identified as a priority objective under the regulation. So one of the ones that are first amongst equals, or at least tied for first amongst equals.
Yeah. And clean electricity supply is a priority to BC Hydro. You see that in our near-term actions. You see it in the opportunities that we're exploring. We are focused on clean electricity supply, and these existing facilities, their continued use, they're essential to meeting our customers' need for capacity until we bring in more clean electricity supply, such as Revelstoke 6. So that clean electricity supply absolutely remains our priority.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Next is Ms. Davies for the Association of Major Power Customers.
Morning. My question pertains to the escalated need for capacity resources in the 2026 update. I was just wondering, as load growth is largely a result of emerging and specific industrial sectors, in your 2026 update, did you look at specific sector demand response potential that could coincide with that growth?
Just before we get into the demand response, there is certainly industrial load growth, and in some sectors for sure. There's also residential and electric vehicle load growth, and that was provided on slide 33. The only sector that really is expected to continue to be flat is commercial, for the reasons that we talked about yesterday. But residential customer load growth is expected to increase at a rate of 1.6% on average, which is the same as the overall forecast rate. So large industrial is growing. Residential electric vehicles, heat pumps, that's growing as well at that same rate.
But the question, okay, yeah.
Yeah. So in terms of demand response, I think I will go back to a response I gave earlier. Like, certainly we are pushing really, really hard. And the key is, as I mentioned a couple of times, to get a certain level of megawatts from these programs, you need to actually achieve a lot more megawatts in terms of the subscription that you get. So again, coming back to my battery example, like to get 150 megawatts of capacity that you can put in to the load resource balances, you needed 400 megawatts of batteries. Similarly, so to make a capacity dent in our need, you need lots of this demand response. And within the time frame, like again, with the efforts that we are taking on DSM, we think this is a very reasonable estimate of what we have. And yesterday I talked about the certainty that we need for capacity resources. We're trying to meet peak load, and as I said, like our peak happens during cold snaps in the winter, can last 2 weeks. So it's not like we're looking for a day here or a day there. We need that capacity for an extended period of time. These are times when it's sub-zero in Vancouver and like minus 40 in the interior. So you need that with certainty. And yesterday I mentioned some examples like from 2024, like if we don't have that capacity with certainty, you're looking at cutting off people's power to people when temperatures are at minus 40, which was what Alberta was almost at the verge of doing, right? So that's why we believe continued operation of IG and McMahon, it's the best solution in the near term. It is McMahon, again, it's for a very time limited period, and IG, it's a very limited amount of generation, and GHGs go with the capacity contribution. So given of that, considering all of those obligations and the need to make sure we can meet the needs of our customers, reliability, which is the paramount responsibility for us, we think this is the best course of action.
So did you look into demand response for growing and emerging sectors, specifically like data centers or AI opportunities there?
As we discussed yesterday, there is a curtailment component to the call for demand. It is a 10% curtailment requirement to bid into the call for demand. And there's additional points in that competitive process for applicants that can curtail more. Generally, what we've heard from that industry is that they do, along with other industries, such as LNG, they do value reliable, firm, dependable supply. And interruptibility is it's not their preferred way of operating. I guess they don't have that level of flexibility. So they haven't put themselves forward as a industry type that would benefit or prefer to engage in being interrupted. Nonetheless, we did put that as a minimum requirement in the call for demand, and we'll see how that call for demand plays out and the extent to which we might get some winning proposals that are able to curtail more.
Okay. So Nova Scotia has a program for industrial customers that allows for more significant curtailment. I think it's around 15% annually. And as a result, they don't include that load on their firm resource, or I guess on the demand side as a firm demand. So would it be your intention then, if you've got about 10% to more, that you're potentially curtailing these customers to not include that load as firm requirement?
Our peak demand load forecasts do not include interruptible power service to customers. So if we've got if we have a customer on an interruptible rate, and we don't have a lot of that, but we don't build it into the peak forecast. We do build it into the energy forecast because they do still take energy service. But as an example, and some in the room will be familiar with our freshet rate or incremental energy rate. Those are our interruptible services. They don't show up in our peak demand forecast. The call for demand, I mean, if we had a rate schedule where we could interrupt large industrial customers for entire duration of a 2-week cold snap, then that would be something that we would look at. We don't have those types of rate schedules right now for that type of extended full interruption of an entire facility. And the call for demand doesn't contemplate that either.
So that 600 megawatt of load growth due to data centers and AI is considered firm in your supply demand tables?
Well, we don't have 600.
I thought it was 400, then an additional 200 in 2028.
Yeah, I don't want to revisit the whole discussion from yesterday, but on slide 27, we have the breakdown of the AI data center. There's 350 megawatts that are not subject to the call for demand. They're under regular tariffs. There's 200 megawatts. That is our assumption of what comes through the call for demand. It could award up to 400. We've assumed 50%, 200 megawatts that come through. That does not have a interruptibility or curtailment built into it. It is possible that we could get all 400 megawatts come through or be awarded, and that 10%, if that happened, 10% could be curtailable or 40 megawatts. So of the 200 megawatts that are in the forecast, there could be 20 megawatts through that call for demand component of curtailability. So it's not immaterial, 200 megawatts, but it's 20 megawatts out of 200, but it's not going to address the near-term need for capacity and the 400 megawatts that we are expecting for Island Generation and McMahon.
Okay, and this is going back a while, so you might not have it topical, but I remember demand response potential being reviewed, and I think the TAC meetings, but also maybe the application, and there were 2 programs, A and B, each of them over 500 megawatts, that I did not get included in the 2025 IRP. Ultimately, I'm just wondering if you revisited those potential as a result of the 2026 update for more expedited capacity needs.
Yeah, so earlier in my presentation, I talked about the conservation review that we did in support of the 2025 IRP, where in 2024, we did a review which included demand response, and also noting that we did look at demand. Yeah, that's the slide. That was the first option that we looked as an alternative to meeting this short-term capacity need. And again, it provides around 28 megawatts that could address near-term needs, also noting the price or the estimated cost there.
So the original potential for demand response program A and B, though, was over 500 megawatts as it was presented. I was just checking the workshop slides. It's dated, but I'm just wondering how you got from there to 40 megawatts now.
Yeah, so again, I'm not sure which slide you're referring to, but in general, what I can talk to is demand response. We already have demand response in our load resource balances, and Oh, do you want to say the exact numbers?
For sure, yeah. So in our May letter, which I believe is Exhibit B8, we do show demand response as a resource there, and the load resource balance for capacity. And we do have in fiscal 30, 427 megawatts from demand response. That is row 45 of the load resource balance, and increasing over time to 728 by fiscal 35. So we have a very aggressive demand response program launched. It's a big part of our load resource balance, and it's a big part of the PowerSmart 2.0.
That was for existing supply?
Existing
Or committed, sorry. Committed supply?
These are considered initiated
Yes.
in our load resource balance. So these are demand response programs that we are initiating, and many of them were talked about yesterday and are in our PowerSmart 2.0. We are pushing demand response as far as we can. My colleague, Mr. De Souza, mentioned the demand response potential study that we did to inform this 2025 integrated resource plan. And you'll see the numbers show up in the load resource balance as how far we are pushing demand response. So certainly it is a priority for us, and we recognize energy efficiencies. It's good for the customers too. So that's also, there's a regulatory obligation for us to consider DSM first, and it's also good for our customers. So we do take it, and we are taking it as far as we can.
Okay, so just to clarify then, to finish then, as a result of the 2026 capacity updates, capacity supply update requirements, you didn't advance any additional demand response above your original 2025 application though, correct?
As the slide shows, we did look at that additional potential that's available. It is small. It is also very high cost. So this was not selected as a preferred alternative. So we did not advance this demand response B program.
Okay, and similar with time, any demand rates. There's no additional demand rates proposed.
Well, we do have in our load resource balance as demand response, we do have industrial time varying rates. We've also launched residential time of day rates. So there are a suite of time varying rates already either in market, or I believe the industrial one is, I believe it's in front of the commission right now. So it is coming.
Yeah, again, those are initiated or committed. It's not new to this.
They are reflected in the load resource balance, if that's your question.
Yes, under the initiated or committed line, not the new resource line, correct?
In existing and committed is our residential time of day rate. It's categorized there because it's already commission approved. It is an IRP action that came out of the 2021 IRP, but because it's already gone through commission review, it is put in the existing and committed category. And then for the initiated resource, we have the additional rate offerings and the industrial time varying rate that's in front of the commission right now, as well as industrial load curtailment and additional demand response programs. And for the planned resources in the IRP for the capacity, there's Energy Efficiency Program B that brings capacity savings with that.
Okay, thank you.
Mr. Chair, just before I move on to the next question, I just make note of the time. It's a little past 10. Just going to hazard a guess based on the pace of things. I suspect we're probably on track to finish this morning. If you wanted to take a mid-morning break, I'm wondering if this might be a good opportunity, but I'll leave it with you.
Yeah, thanks for pointing that out. I got so engrossed I forgot all about the time. So yes, let's take a 15-minute break and come back at 10:20. Okay, thanks everyone. Thank you, panel. Okay, thank you, everyone. Please go ahead.
Next is Mr. Helen for RCIA.
Good morning. Probably talk first to you more, Mr. Kumar, and then to the rest of the panel, although not exclusively, so free range. If we could go to slide 77, please. Hopefully, yes. So in terms of optimizing your assets, I look at the 4 green boxes, if you will, and put them into 3 categories, if I could. Revelstoke, that's a new addition. It's a brownfield site, but it's new. It's a new facility, if you will, because there's a new turbine, 500 megawatt.
That it's an existing facility with an ability to take the 6th
Yeah.
unit.
So brownfield, but a new asset, if I could describe it that way.
Yes.
Okay, we won't worry too much about the description unless it's super important for you.
It will get to be important later.
All right, we'll
If
bear
only
with you.
If only subtly. And then GMS units 1 through 5, and then the 7 Mile and Mica stuff. That's existing assets that are going to go through an upgrade life extension type activity.
That is true for Mica and 7 Mile. For GMS, what we are doing is changing the ISO bus in the station and the circuit breakers to a higher rating that allows us to get the 100 megawatts of additional capacity. So it's not the actual generation unit and the turbine, but it's the ancillary assets that go with it that we are actually changing.
Okay, that is a very helpful clarification. Thank you. And then the smaller opportunities, I'll simply ignore.
You can, but we can't.
No, I understand. For the purposes of conversation, I'm just trying to establish some principles more than specific.
I understand now.
And then, in terms of the IRP, from previous GRAs, the Mica, the Revelstoke, the 7 Mile, the description that's been provided to me with regards to when Hydro decides to do the work, it's asset condition related primarily. They're major assets, so the timing would be triggered by asset condition related determinations as opposed to need.
Yeah, I think maybe a bit of context would be helpful here. As you and I have discussed in other hearings, BC Hydro's assets are aging, whether it's distribution, transmission, generation. And as those assets age, it gives us an opportunity to look at higher efficiency turbines, as Sanjaya was mentioning. Up till now, the capacity has not been a key focus for us. If you look at the last 10, 15 years, the load has been flat. So I think what you are right now seeing is a confluence of 2 things happening. One is the aging infrastructure and the need for capacity. So when you bring those 2 together, these are the opportunities we are starting to now look at. And the numbers that you see over there in the top box, 1,000 megawatts, that is what we feel we can get from our existing generation stations. 5 years, 10 years ago, we didn't have that focus because we didn't need that level of capacity. So I think it is a timing of a couple of things happening at the same time.
Okay, and I appreciate the clarification, very helpful and consistent with what I was hoping you would say, I guess, if I could describe it that way. Now, in terms of the IRP, if the need wasn't there, is it fair to say that the Mica and the 7 Mile, those that are initiated, those would occur regardless of need, because they were asset condition related?
And that is correct. If you look at those 2 opportunities specifically, they were moving forward as projects as a result of the replacement of our assets. And from a timing perspective, the feasibility of that had not been completed when the IRP was put forward. And then when we made the May 28th submission, we said, by the way, the feasibility of these projects has moved forward. We now see a upside on the capacity side. That's why we included that as part of our submission. But you also may note in that submission, we are not asking that as a near-term action. Because these are projects that are moving forward. We are providing that as a context that there is additional capacity that we are going to be able to take advantage of but those projects are moving for other drivers.
Okay, and that would contrast with GMS units 1 through 5, where the turbine generator is of sufficiently good condition that you don't have any plans in the planning window to upgrade those, so that it would be post the planning period, and it's only the bus upgrade that you're bringing forward that is not necessarily condition related, it's need related. Is that correct?
So if I'm understanding correctly, in terms of the what's involved in the GMS units 1 to 5, like like Mr. Kumar said, it's mostly replacing the isolated phase buses and the circuit breakers. There's some other components that get us to the 100 megawatts, including refurbishment of unit 5, but not like a new turbine or a generator. And that's what brings the 100 megawatts, if I understood your question correctly.
So it's less about the scope of work and more about what triggers the timing of the work. The trigger is the IRP need, not asset condition, on the basis of GMS units 1 through 5.
That's right.
Okay, but for Mica and 7 Mile, it's asset condition, not need, that is driving the timing.
That's correct. Yes, I think I mentioned these units are like more than 40 years old, so we do need to replace them, and it is driven by that need to replace them, so to avoid forced outages.
Okay. Mr. Kumar, you're looking at paper. Oh, okay. Okay. So here's sort of where it's all sort of gelling, so that I properly understand how to read the evidence. If there is no need developing for GMS, that work would not occur until outside the planning period, because the asset condition is sufficiently good with the existing bus bar and that. But for the MICAs, the renewals, they would all occur and be driven by asset-based timings. So I guess partly what I'm saying is in a subsequent GRA, I'm not expecting to see in the next GRA, I'm not expecting to see a GMS application saying, hey, the condition's terrible, it's now time to replace.
I think there could be projects that come from our capital plan for GMS facility that could be end of life. It's not to say that those won't happen. All I'm saying is those are not reflected here because there's no capacity increase that's driven by this 100 megawatts. So our conditions of our systems are aging. There could be a project that comes out of GMS in the next 10 years that requires us to replace the assets. So I think those are two different things that are happening in these facilities. And I can't say for sure that in the next 10 years, nothing's happening at GMS. It's possible that we could have projects there that could be end of life replacements.
Okay, so that kind of, I guess, comes to my question then. Why isn't it the case that in the IRP, you are showing your expectations of condition-based asset renewals for all your major generation assets? Because when I look at the data, I don't see that. I see an assumption of 0 condition-based renewals other than the ones you identify, as opposed to having an outlook provided.
So from an IRP perspective, what's important is the things that provide either energy or capacity. We might be doing replacements which provide no energy and no capacity, and certainly those will not be reflected in an IRP.
Okay, I respect what you're saying, but I would say that's inconsistent with what has been the long-established patterns of upgrade life extensions to these large hydroelectric assets, where every time you've done them, you have achieved new energy and new capacity.
I would say at some point you run out of the ability to do that, right? You can only put in bigger or more efficient turbines up to a certain point. You can increase the the capacity of the circuit breakers only up to a certain point. Like you cannot just make the units bigger and bigger every time you do a replacement. So whenever there is an opportunity, yes, we do take that opportunity. So mica units 1 to 2, and in the future, mica units 3 to 4, there could be some opportunities to do that. And certainly we'll take those. But again, reiterating, not every piece of asset equipment can be upgraded so that it can provide additional energy and capacity.
Yeah, I think the point that we are trying to make over here is we don't see the Venn diagram between the capital plan and the IRP completely overlapping. It is overlapping in some aspects, and if it's overlapping, we provide that over here. There are many aspects of our capital plan that have no impact on energy and capacity. I think that is not the preview of an IRP. Now, the key principle we follow is about visibility and transparency. And we need to give the commissions and the interveners visibility on our capital projects. We need to give visibility on our IRP decisions. And I think there are many different avenues. IRP provides avenue for talking about the long-term resource plans and energy and capacity. The RRA provides opportunity to talk about our capital plan. On top of that, our major project applications, whether that's a CPCN or a 44.2, if it's over $250 million, provides visibility in terms of the project coming as a standalone application. So I think for us, it is about how we make the decisions, and we want to make sure that the commission and the interveners have the ability to ask us any questions on the drivers behind it, and we can bring that forward. So I think that transparency is there from many different avenues, and I don't see the value of bringing everything into an IRP because that is not the intent and the scope of the IRP discussion.
Okay, I hear your answer, but what I'm taking away from it is there are condition-based asset renewals that you can reasonably foresee in the planning period that, you know, based on past history would lead to capacity increases and energy increases, similar to MICA 1, 2, and 7 Mile, but you aren't reporting them in the IRP.
No, I think what we are saying is as we go down this path, because these facilities were put in place 40, 50 years ago. And as we are exploring the opportunity of redeveloping those opportunities or the projects, we might get a more efficient turbine design that allows us to move forward with. As we identify those will be part of the IRP as we identify. And the next IRP is in 28. As we go through this portfolio of assets that are listed over here, and there are going to be opportunities that we will find that give us additional capacity or energy, we'll make that as part of the IRP scope for next time.
Okay, so if I understand what you're saying, you haven't looked, I'll say, far enough ahead with regards to asset condition and expected activities in this IRP. Like maybe you look 5 years out, but you're not looking 10 or to the end of the planning period. Would that be a fair sort of summary of what you said?
No, I think we are constantly exploring those opportunities. And as I said, with the need of capacity becoming more acute in the coming years, I think as we start looking at these aging infrastructure projects, we will be looking at it from a lens of not only replacement of those assets, but also looking at the ability for it to provide us additional capacity. And as those are identified, and that exercise is currently underway actually in our teams, those will be part of the applications we'll be putting forward in terms of the load resource balance that we'll have in the future.
Okay.
You can make argument later
I think
about
it's moving into the realm of argument now.
Yeah, because I think I'm hearing a fairly consistent answer, and I think elements to it, as I think I heard, is that it might be hard to put all of these potentials into some kind of long-term IRP because the technologies change, even the type of turbine and so on. That's what I've been hearing here. So and I guess you've been hearing it too.
Not inconsistent with what I've seen in other jurisdictions where, for example, Manitoba Hydro has simply said, yeah, we didn't look at it, so we assumed it was zero in terms of upgrades when we renew an asset, even if my historic pattern is there has always been some increase in capacity and energy. So it's not inconsistent with what I've seen.
Yeah, but I don't think I heard that it would be zero. I heard that it will be a process that's ongoing at all times to reassess how's need changing, how's technology changing, what are the costs of going doing this, this, or that.
Yeah. Yes, but if we were to go to slide 59 or 68, what's reported on those slides is a tacit assumption that it is zero.
And that's why I welcome you to write an argument about that. Yeah.
Okay. No, I wanted to get to clarity on that. And thank you very much for your time.
I think the one point, if you don't mind, I want to make is if you look at the 2026 reference load forecast that we submitted as part of our May submission on 28th of May, we have included 7 Mile and Mica as capacity resources in our load resource balance. And if you read the submission, it talks about the fact that the projects had been launched as end-of-life replacement. We had not finished our feasibility of our higher capacity from those. As that feasibility became real for us, we have included that as part of the submission. So I think it behooves us to make sure that that capacity can be taken advantage of before we actually move forward. And that takes time to talk to the suppliers, talk to our engineers, trying to figure out what the new turbine design is going to be, because these are old facilities. And when we have a clear understanding of what that capacity and energy is, we will include that in the resource stack. So I think the example of Manitoba Hydro and saying it's a zero, that is not the approach we are taking here. So I just want to be very clear with that.
Yes,
Mr. Quayle, go ahead.
Any of you acquainted with Mr. Vern Ruskin? Any of you remember Vern Ruskin? He was the chief engineer at BC Electric, which of course was the private sector precursor of BC Hydro, and was involved directly in the design of a lot of the dams that are in the Columbia River system today. And he told me, and anybody who would listen to him, that when they designed these dams, they were designed to accommodate retrofitting with generation facilities. And he said that the detailed plans to do this were all sitting in Hydro's archives, and he couldn't get anybody to go and take a look. Now, it may be that Hydro looked at it and thought, okay, that just isn't. But I just wonder, is this something that you have examined, the extent to which there was a reference to retrofitting existing dams that don't have generation? I wonder if this is one of the resources available to you. That is, the plans that these engineers, who kind of knew what they were doing 60 or 70 years ago. Mr. Ruskin would have appreciated me raising the issue and frustrated him to no end.
Well, Tim Newton could be someone that you could also contact for this, but yeah.
I doubt that Mr. Ruskin's with us anymore. If I'm mistaken, he'd be very, very elderly.
Yeah, I do actually recognize the name. I'm not sure when, but yes. So certainly, yeah, and thank you for the point, Mr. Quill. So as we start looking at this, certainly we will go back to past studies that look at the facilities, what they had in mind when they were constructed. And again, kind of drawing a parallel for the large hydro as well. I think Mr. Kumar said, well, we do have studies on, say, Saitia, Hamadko, which are like half a century old. I mean, that would be the first place we look as a starting point, right? But of course, with changes to how we look at water use, environmental regulations, many of those potential might be quite outdated, but certainly something we would start with.
Okay, so on Mr. Ruskin's behalf, I'm asking if somebody go down, dust off the plans, and see if they're helpful.
We are exploring all those opportunities. As I said, we are looking at existing projects and plants, as well as additional powerhouses in our existing dam facilities.
Thank you.
All that is part of our portfolio.
Thank you, Mr. Quayle.
Thanks. Are there any more questions from parties either in the room or online? Oh, I think I see Mr. Ince for the Commercial Energy Consumers Association online.
Yes, thank you. I've got some short questions to fill out the regulatory record. I think these are fairly self-evident questions, and they relate to the risk and cost of oversupply. So the simple questions are, does BC Hydro see that its greatest risk of oversupply is in the freshet, and that's when the water comes down, and that risk will persist?
So this really gets to the operational aspects of our system, mistakes, and much less to the planning side of things. But I believe, as we referred to, our system is becoming more diversified. So we are bringing in resources such as wind, some solar. So that would certainly help with the freshet issue to a certain extent.
Would you see that freshet risk to be continue over the horizon of the long-term resource plan, 20, 25 years?
Could you please clarify, like, what exactly do you mean by freshet risk, especially in a planning context?
Well, the risk of oversupply. So for the next 20 to 25 years, do you see the greatest seasonal risk of oversupply to continue to be in the freshet period?
So just to make sure, to try to help make sure we've got this clear, I mean, hydropower dominant systems will have a problem of, or at risk of, energy oversupply during a freshet. So that's something that goes on forever. So I'm not quite sure. Do you mean, are you referring that to a system problem, or that somehow water flows will suddenly flatten out in British Columbia and be constant? I'm not quite sure what you're asking. I guess I need clarification.
Well, I think for the foreseeable future, and BC Hydro can confirm this, that the freshet will continue to be the period in which it has the most potential inflow, the most potential energy production, and therefore the greatest risk of oversupply. I'm seeking a simple clarification if that continues to be the case.
Yeah, I think in principle that would be a fair statement. As you can see from our last call and the 25 call, we haven't gone for run of the river generation. We've gone for wind and solar. So I think the freshet risk that you're talking about, I don't think is changing as a result of some of the procurement decisions we have made. I would say it's actually diversifying that for us. If you look at the 2010 and the calls before, we had some run of the river projects there that were quite large that had the freshet risk. So I think it is a area that, as you identified, is obviously a challenge from a freshet standpoint, but I don't think that is changing from a profile standpoint with the decisions we are making here.
Yes, thank you. That's exactly what I was looking for. And I note in previous IRPs and call processes that there was a significant amount of run of river that was acquired, and that perhaps exacerbated the freshet problem. Is that the case?
Yeah, I'm not sure how I would describe that worsening of the situation. As I said, we did have run of the river projects that were given EPAs in the 2008 to 10 calls. But as I said, our focus right now is on wind and solar, because that's where we get the most competitive level of energy acquisition and the diversification.
And I'll just say on behalf of the commission that, and I think I'm sure we must have written this on the last IRP, we were happy to see that BC Hydro's requests for proposals was very focused on value to BC Hydro, which may have been a bit of a challenge with some of those freshet projects in the past. So I think BC Hydro is following a different model here.
Exactly. Thank you.
Next question.
With respect to export during these periods, would BC Hydro agree that the period of lowest market prices across the year would be during the freshet? And I'm thinking of Mid-C, which is BC Hydro's main, export terminal, that the lowest prices historically have been during the freshet, and that would persist across the planning horizon.
None of us on the panel are experts on the export market, Mr. Ince, but generally what you're saying seems reasonable. I think the energy prices right now are quite low, but none of us are experts to give you a market.
And I'm not sure that this, Mr. Ince, how about trying another question if you have one?
Okay. Well, I'm thinking about the line of thought that BC Hydro would be long during the freshet, and the period of lowest prices would be during the freshet, so it would be a double hit. But I'll move on to the next question. And this relates back to slide 60. And I think there's still some residual issues regarding this slide. And my question is that can BC Hydro foreseeably see a future where the market prices for energy going out of the province are higher than its domestic cost of procurement? So that center column, that indicates the more we export, the higher the rate impact would be. And can BC Hydro see any foreseeable future whereby that would be reversed?
I think there are obviously possibilities in terms of looking at the export market, and that's where PowerX comes into play. I think if I'm just sort of looking at it broadly, if we can combine energy and capacity together, I think there's a huge market for that, and that is something that PowerX would have to explore. But purely on an energy basis, I think that's what Sanjay and the analysis has shown, is that there's going to be a negative rate impact. But the combination of energy and capacity can have a positive impact if that can be achieved.
Yes, and to clear up one point, thank you. To clear up a point on that middle column is that BC Hydro ran a high market price case, and that resulted in numbers that were still positive, which means that even under a high market scenario, exporting more power resulted in a higher cost to the utility. Is that true?
That is what the evidence in Appendix H shows. Yes, that's true.
Thank you. One last question on LNG. There was a discussion this morning about serving LNG, and I know this is somewhat technical, but LNG is potentially the biggest load growth area for BC Hydro, and that I mentioned earlier that the refrigeration in LNG is by far the biggest energy consumer. It's basically a big refrigerator. And so there was a comment that the LNG plants could use natural gas to generate electricity, and then that electricity would run the refrigerator, so to speak. And I think that introduces some confusion in that can BC Hydro confirm that there's two main ways of serving LNG currently? And the first one, by far the most common and traditional method, is to run natural gas turbines to run the refrigeration loop. That's number one. And number two, to use electric drives to run the refrigeration loop. What was talked about this morning seems to be a necessary hybrid or intermediate step of using natural gas to generate electricity and then electricity to run the turbines. Can BC Hydro confirm its understanding of LNG and how it operates?
Yeah, I had the same question, so I am interested here.
The LNG terminals that are requesting or taking service from BC Hydro, their designs are largely set. They're as approved through their environmental assessment, and in many cases, the engineering is complete. In some cases, the construction is complete or near complete. And generally what we're seeing is either it's all electric, so that's the case for wood fiber and cedar. So liquefaction and the balance of plant is all electric, and they want reliable, dependable electricity service. Or we're seeing like LNG 1, where the electricity is for the balance of plant, and they're using natural gas for the liquefaction. So those are the designs that we have here in BC. The all electric, if a proponent has designed their facility that way, they've received approval for that, they've put in the order for the equipment, then it would be unlikely that they would change that at this point. We do have oil and gas customers that could self-supply their own electricity until such time as they could electrify, but the design of the plant would still be electricity based. Did that clear that up?
Mr. Chair?
So I think what we're talking about is just like the old propane fridge I used to have, is that the compressors are run by burning natural gas. And I think that's what you're getting at, Mr. Ince, correct?
Exactly. Yes, that's the traditional way. And
So we're good.
We talked about this potential hybrid solution where natural gas goes to electricity and electricity goes to the refrigeration loop, and I thought that was perhaps confusing.
Yes. Hydro just wants to say something.
Okay,
Yeah,
sorry.
I probably could be a bit more clear about the design, and it is public what the designs are for the LNG terminals proposed in BC. So wood fiber cedar, all electric, LNG Canada 1 and 2, electric balance of plant, gas liquefaction, siliciums, which is the other very large proposal. Their design is for an all electric terminal. They are proposing in their environmental assessment to self-supply the electricity in the near term with power barges that would be run on gas, but the actual terminal is electricity, is run on electricity. Is that clear?
Yes.
Okay, thank you.
Yes.
And I think it's the third example, Mr. Ince, that you're talking about, which is a hybrid of the two, which is confusing. But that's the model that SLISMS is going down, which is all electric with gas generation for the electricity.
One more brief question. I remember talking to an LNG designer, and this relates to LNG and reliability, is that even a sub 1 second outage in power would cause a complete plant purge. So my understanding of the plant would be there would be so much thermal energy and inertia built into the system that it could withstand some short outages in electricity supply. But I was corrected in that LNG requires 99.99% electricity, and that, again, even a 1 second outage would require a multi-hour or day restart of the plant, which could cost a significant amount of money. Is that BC Hydro's understanding of LNG reliability requirements? And that certainly would cost.
Yeah, in our discussions with the LNG proponents, they have expressed that same level of concern regarding reliability, Mr. Ince, that even a small outage can have significant impact on their operations, both from bringing the plant back as well as the lost revenue. I think if you look at the system that serves LNG in the North Coast, the current 500 kV line is highly, highly reliable. Because of the way we maintain it, the integrity of it, the design. So I think we are quite hopeful with the and the historical numbers have been quite 99% reliability for the. By twinning the line, you increase the reliability even further. So I think that gives that comfort to the existing or the LNG proponents in terms of the transmission system reliability. There's obviously things we have to look at it from a regional perspective, because once you have built the bulk system, you need to start thinking of how you're feeding that on a regional basis. So I think those discussions are ongoing with the proponents, but reliability is an absolute key for us. And that's the level of reliability that I don't think our other customers have expected or expressed concerns about. So LNG does have are on the high end of that spectrum from a reliability standpoint.
Thank you very much.
Thank you, Mr. Ince.
There any other questions either in the room or online? And I don't believe there are any questions from BCUC staff on this portion, so I'll leave it and see if the panel has any questions.
Okay. You were going to ask?
I'm going to risk asking something that may already be on the evidentiary record, which I read some time ago. But just because it's just come up again, looking on your last slide, slide 82, seeing there just sort of almost a summary, and one of those key bullets being consequence of electricity deficit is worse than consequence of a surplus. And just thinking about that in terms of, say, a situation where it's, the deficit being something like mine X cannot proceed when they would like to. That proposition seems like something that reasonable people could potentially debate and have differing evidence on. How is the consequence measured? How do you know it's worse? with one than with the other. And so I'm curious, just in terms of this showing up so prominently, because when I think about your plan, I'm not sure, is that assumption, how necessary is that? Because a lot of the decisions in the plan seem like they would be prudent, even if the consequence of a deficit was equally bad to the consequence of a surplus. So I'm curious if anyone could speak to that. Would you have planned differently, say, dramatically? So if, say, they were the same, or is this just sort of a helpful argument, or is it foundational?
In the 2023 IRP update and also in this 2025 IRP, we do plan to be above the reference forecast. And part of that is because of the long lead time for new supply. And other aspects of that are reliability, also having sufficient power available for our customers, not just a new mine, but also to support climate action and electrification, being able to support economic development and climate action in the province, and paramount to have reliable service and self-sufficiency. If we plan too tight to the line and then load develops faster than we expect, we could be in a situation of not having reliable service, not meeting our self-sufficiency requirement, and also secondary, not supporting those other objectives around economic development and climate action.
I think the other thing I would add is if we were able to turn back the clock and were 10 years behind when the load forecast was flat, I don't think we would have made that statement, because we would have looked at it as a balanced probability of trying to manage it, because the risk was symmetrical in terms of oversupply versus undersupply. What has happened in the recent years is, with all the focus from the federal government and the provincial government on economic development and all these major projects being announced from a mining LNG perspective, pipelines being discussed, we do feel that we need to be prepared for that scenario. And that's why we put that statement in there, is the asymmetric risk that we're starting to see here, which was not there to the same extreme in the 21 IRP. And I think that's what differentiates this approach, is the fact that we do feel that there's a element of being ready for the future, which we have to, as planners, make those decisions and have those options at our disposal so that we can move forward with those.
No, thanks. You can follow.
Thank you. I just have a question, or maybe two, and it's to do with slide 75. And like Commissioner Murphy, maybe this has already been answered, but I'll risk it. On that table, you've got reservoir hydro storage. So, and I can't remember if this was explained somewhere. Is this to do with actually getting into the existing reservoirs to be able to hold more? I'm not quite sure what this was.
Yeah. I think this one, as I had mentioned yesterday, Mr. Chair, the Hamatco proposal actually came from the RFUI. So this one would be referring to the large hydro proposal that we received through the RFUI project.
Oh, I see. Okay.
Sorry, we should have probably used some different words to describe it.
Because I looked at pumped hydro storage and I thought, oh, that can happen in lots of places.
Yeah.
And then
so this would be the new reservoir storage on the Hamatco is what this is referring to.
Got it. Now, looking at, and my other question is on this slide as well. I mean, it does stand out that there's 12,440 megawatts of fossil gas as and I don't know how many projects that was. It could be just a few, or a few very large ones, or many people coming in with smaller projects, proposals for your request for expressions of interest. But I don't see any coal. I don't see any nuclear. And speaking of our earlier discussion, maybe there's not a lot of run of river that, I mean, that can't give you capacity anyway, but, or it could, I suppose. But so why are we seeing this? Like, why especially when you've got a footnote at the bottom says submissions were received, but BC Hydro is not pursuing any new fossil gas resources. Wouldn't it have been nice for you to tell people that in advance, or maybe just the policy did change? And of course, we know that just around this, the news while we're doing this process, which is fun, is the government clarifying how McMahon and an island generation are intended to be used, as opposed, although I see in the media that there's some people assuming, the BC Hydro, the government have now said, let's start doing natural gas as almost like a base load and capacity resource. So I'm just curious about if you can give me a little bit of an explanation of how we came to this situation.
Yeah. So I think, as I mentioned before, the RFUI was an open-ended request for capacity options. Nuclear was not in there because of the fact that the energy objective actually refrains us from using that. Coal can be quite extreme, and I don't think that there is any appetite or a policy around the use of that in the province. The reason this was included in the RFUI at the stage when it was put out was we wanted to explore whether there was any carbon capture opportunities in the province or new technology that had evolved that would allow us to mitigate the impact of the greenhouse gases that would be associated with the fossil gas. And I think, as we all know, this is a technology that's being explored right now. Alberta is looking at it as part of their MOU with the federal government, but it's not reached a point where it can actually provide you with that comfort that can be done at a scale that we were hoping to see. So I think this was more an exploratory exercise that we went through based on the submissions and the interest from the market and what we have seen. At this point, we are not exploring that to move forward.
Thank you. Were any of those fossil gas expressions of interest, including carbon capture and storage?
Yes. Yes, some of them were.
Okay. In the Northeast?
Mostly in the Northeast, I believe. Certainly in the Northeast. I'm not sure whether there were any in the other parts of the province.
Right. So if you move now to a real request for proposals, someone with natural gas with carbon capture and storage might be allowed to bid in on that?
We haven't actually designed that process, Mr. Chair, and that is something that we will have to discuss as we move forward. So at this point, we are in the assessment phase, and then as the discussions move forward, we design that RFP, then we'll have to look at in terms of what technology we are going to be looking at. But at this point, we are not exploring natural gas new plants as part of the capacity evaluation.
Right. Well, you're not exploring. Yeah, that's why I was just having trouble with like BC Hydro is not pursuing any new fossil gas. But I mean, this is a process where you're asking people, tell us what we should be accepting. So I guess you're saying you're still open to that in your next request for proposal, or you haven't decided.
We haven't decided.
Okay, great. Those are the questions I had. Mr. Bear, where are we at?
I see we have a couple of raised hands on Teams. I'm not sure if maybe a couple of people might have questions arising from this discussion. Would the panel be open to entertaining that?
Yes, definitely.
So first, I believe, is Mr. Craig from the CEC.
Thank you. Just following up on the fossil gas and potential carbon capture and use. The panel discussion was about carbon capture and sequestration. Analysis that I've done is carbon capture and use can be quite attractive matched with fossil gas and take advantage of the economics that are available.
Thanks, Mr. Craig. Did you have a question?
Yes, I wanted to know if BC Hydro had looked at carbon capture and use.
Yeah, I don't believe there were any submissions that looked at the use of that captured CO2 for like another purpose.
Great, thanks. Thanks, Mr. Craig. Who's the other question?
Next is Mr. Magnus from the Clean Energy Association of BC.
Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you very much. And again, I'll be brief. I just wanted to delve in as well on pump storage. I think we've talked a lot about batteries and a large reservoir, natural gas, etc. It's clear to us that the potential for, before this RFO outcome was over 8,000 megawatts, and now we see that proven out here. I know there are some unique construction cost challenges, but the question to BC Hydro would be whether you're seriously considering these pump storage options in the near term or into the 2030s, particularly considering BC has the best, among the best pumped hydro potential in Canada, and taking into consideration lessons from other jurisdictions. If not, definitely something to encourage, as there's massive potential there and lots of interest from First Nations as well. Thank you very much.
Yes, certainly. We've done studies as well that we published in the past where, yes, BC has great pump storage potential. Pump storage does, and I'm going to go to the next slide, slide 76. So again, as I mentioned, pump storage which has a short duration, so little amount of storage in the upper reservoir, it is subject to this phenomenon where, like with peak shaving, you get a flattening load and the effectiveness of those capacity resources diminish as you add more and more. We are definitely looking at long duration pump storage, and by long duration I mean facilities that can generate for like 16 hours a day and do so for 2 weeks at a stretch. We've done a study on that, and some of those results are published as part of the IRP in Chapter 2. And as we look at also optimizing our assets, that's also something that we would look at, where we have, say, cascading reservoirs on our river system. And if they are close enough, there's certainly the opportunity where you can put a pump turbine in between those. And given that those reservoirs can be quite big, you would be able to get like the long duration generation that we need. So certainly something we are exploring both at our facilities as well as other potential across the province.
Great, thank you. Back to you, Mr. Bear. I think, are we?
Anything further arising from the panel?
No.
And anything for BC Hydro? I see Mr. Webb shaking his head. So I think over to the panel for any closing remarks.
Right. So I want to thank BC Hydro and the panel for clear presentation and clear answers. I want to thank the interveners and commission staff for running a very efficient and effective process. And I really appreciate how interveners were very strategic and focused on the questions, as opposed to sort of a larger rambling effort. And I speak for the panel in saying we were very impressed and appreciative of that, and likewise very focused and clear answers. And thank you for that. It's a challenge to be up there continuously under scrutiny. So I think we're finished with this component, and I want to thank everyone. But I'm going to pass it back to Mr. Bear to just remind us of where we're at in the process and what are the final steps.
Thanks, Mr. Chair. So the rest of the regulatory timetable is set out in order G6626, which is on the preceding page, just in terms of the outstanding dates. Pardon me just a moment here. There's a deadline for submitting letters of comment on June 25th. BC Hydro's final argument is June 30th. Intervenor final argument is due July 16th. And BC Hydro's reply argument is due July 30th. And that should take us to the end.
So, if everyone's fine, thank you. This concludes the workshop for BC Hydro's IRP. Thank you, everyone. We're adjourned. Thanks for saying that.